Hello, my name is Bree, that's spelled B-R-E-I. Thank you so much, and welcome back to Old Soul Podcast. Today I'm doing a commentary, review, summary, so on and so forth, of a movie that I first watched when I was in 7th grade. And before I watched it in 7th grade, it was mandatory that we read the book, and since it was adapted into a film later, we eventually watched the film. We would do like comparisons and just a fun little activity after reading the book. And that story is called The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. And I think what sort of brought on this whole commentary specifically for this film and this story is that I went to Target months ago, and like I always do at Target, I go there for one thing and then I end up getting a ton of other things, always. And The Outsiders novel was there. It was like a new edition version of it, and I remembered reading it several times, but I don't think I ever had a copy. I think I just had like library copies and then the borrowed copy we got in 7th grade. And I was like, oh, I want to buy this book. I remember it being really good. I loved the movie in 7th grade, and I watched it several times after that. And I just wanted a little bit of a refresher, and I thought it was a good story to have in like my collection. So I went and I got it, and I don't regret it. It took me a while to read it though, because I was so busy with work, but finally I read it. And since I am talking about a book that's adapted, and I'm talking about the book and the movie mostly because S.E. Hinton was so involved in the process for the film, and because it has an adaptation, so I should talk about it too. But I think the book is lovely. I love S.E. Hinton's ability to speak about Oklahoma, which I feel like nobody ever really talks about the Midwest unless it's like, oh, it's boring or negative things, which, I mean, if you're from like the Midwest area or like small towns in general, I feel like you can complain about how negative and like boring it can be, but not other people who aren't from there. So I liked that little bit of, representation there, but also I enjoyed that it was a coming of age story that also talked about social class and talked about things in a way where they had an edge to it. It wasn't just a romance. In fact, it didn't feel like much of a romance at all. It wasn't just violence. It was a good mix, and it really got into the nitty-gritty about things that really happen to young kids living in poverty. And we'll get more into detail on that, specifically about which characters were going through which, and I think most of them had their own little spiel and little story, but I'll pinpoint that. But I appreciated her talking about that, and I think she stated that a lot of it was based off of her experience, although and when I say she stated, I mean there's notes in this new edition of the novel where she talks about her experiences and how the novel came about. She wrote it when she was a teenager, which I thought was really cool back in 7th grade, because I loved reading and I thought it was so cool that someone so young wrote a book. And I think that also made me love writing so much, because it's the first time I thought, well, it doesn't really matter how young I am, I can do it too, and also enjoy reading novels. And so yeah, I think she wrote it when she was 15, but it might have gotten published when she was graduating high school, so 17 or 18 when it got published. The movie probably came far later, but it was very successful, and a famous director actually directed it. So yeah, interesting little notes there. I think that I like the novel more, although there's some things that I don't like about it. The misogyny, obviously, which comes with things that are set in a later time period, and also, I can't remember if it's set in like the 50s or the 60s, but it's later in time where the novel is set in that time frame, roughly. And yeah, so misogyny is like impossible to escape at this point, even now. But it's there, and there's some sexism there and some harassment that I don't appreciate. And we'll talk about that when we get into more details with certain characters. And another thing that I didn't like, just some words that were used in the novel. I think they're outdated and offensive, and I don't have time to really pinpoint those, but they come up. So while I feel like this is one of those novels that is timeless in the fact that I think kids, young adults are going to be reading this for years to come, and teachers are going to be talking about this in their classes for years to come, that it does have a little bit of outdated material. Yeah, so if I had to choose between the novel or the movie, I will pick the novel because I appreciated it more. It had more details. I had forgotten things about the novel, the story in general, or there were things that I remembered, but it got into more detail that I had forgotten. So I just think that novels have more time and more ability to tell you more descriptors about the characters and their backgrounds that movies don't really get the chance to do, but they do the best that they can. And I think the movie is great, but I prefer the novel. And I just wanted to do this little spiel in the beginning because otherwise this episode would be way too long, and maybe it still will be, but when you're talking about like a 2-hour runtime movie and a novel, it can be too much. So let's talk about the novel. So The Outsiders was released in 1983. It was rated PG, or at least it's showing on IMDb that it was rated PG. It had the same title as the novel, The Outsiders. Sometimes they change that when they make movies, but they didn't. It seems like they stuck to a lot of the original story, and a lot of that could be, I see in the notes, Kathleen Rowell wrote the screenplay, and S.E. Hinton wrote the novel, but I think she was very much a part of the story, and so a lot of that showed in the film. Like, it felt like it was taken from the book, and they made other decisions for the film just because, directors have their own styles, but there was a careful elegance to it. It was handled with kid gloves, and there was love, and you could tell. So you could see the style of the director, the choices they made. There was still the edge from the original story, but all the characters were still very similar to the novel, and it was done just very well. So that's how adaptation should be. I think that film is a different art form, and so it's going to be different, and I don't know why people think that the novel is going to be like the movie. I feel like the only time, and I've talked about this before in a video, the only reason or the only things that can make you sort of upset about an adaptation is when they completely cut a character out, or they kill a character that's not supposed to die, or they just change everything that's defining about the characters, or defining about something that motivates the plot, right? But other than that, visually, it's a different way of telling the story, and so it's going to be kind of different. But I think when you're so close to the writer, and you have such an amazing cast, like this cast, and I mean, seriously, this cast is full of stars, and I don't know that they were super successful or famous at that point in their careers in 1983, or they were just on the brink. But not only is it a star-studded cast, but they were all very talented and good at their roles, and that's just so unlikely to happen. It's just like everything that was supposed to happen, everything turned out great and fell into place perfectly for this story. So yes, and the director of the film is Francis Ford Coppola, and if you don't recognize the Coppola last name, you should just do some Google searches. Coppola's very successful, have done tons of movies, and it makes a lot of sense. So yeah. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with, I think I'll just start from the beginning and kind of go on, and then in between, if there's a scene that I want to talk about, I'll talk about it in detail, and if not, then I'll just skip it, whatever. So the story starts with these three boys named Ponyboy Curtis, who's actually the main character, and the person who speaks to us from the beginning of the movie. And there's like this famous quote where he's walking out of the movie theater and he states that the only thing that's on his mind is Paul Newman, because he went to see a movie that Paul Newman was in and he loves going to the movies, even though his brother tells him he probably shouldn't, walk home by himself or go by himself. He loves it, he prefers it, he's not distracted. I think that's what he notes in the book, but not necessarily in the movie with his voiceover. And so he's thinking about Paul Newman and a ride home, and that's how the story starts, but it's also how the story ends. I think it's kind of funny because it thrusts you into the story, but it's also just like, I don't know, it's good, it's catchy, it works, I like it, okay? And he even says, like, he's describing what he's doing and over the voiceover in the film, and you see it on screen. He's like, I'm walking out of the darkness of the movie theater, and I don't know if I resonate with it more because I love going to the movies and I could just see it and feel it and know that vibe. So I don't know, I just really love that. So the Curtis family, Ponyboy's the main character. He's the youngest. He's about 14 years old, just turned 14, I believe, so he's very young. And that's another thing, I didn't realize how young Ponyboy was until I read the book. I was like, oh yeah, he's like 15, 16, I think. 15 is still pretty young, but he skipped a grade because he's smart, and he even knows, like, I get good grades, but my brother's still really hard on me, and all these things. And he is so young and going through so much in this novel. All of them are very young, so keep that in mind. But he's the youngest, and it just blows my mind that he goes through all this crap at 14. And then he has his older brother, who's the middle child, and his name is Soda Pop, but they call him Soda, and he works at a gas station, and he works on cars, and he dropped out of school to help his older brother, who's the next oldest brother, named Derry, aka Daryl, but they call him Derry, and he's the oldest. He would probably be going to college, but he can't afford college and afford to take care of his brothers. The reason why they all live together, and well, for one, they've never really had a lot of money, but their parents died, and I think a car accident not too long ago, and so the brothers had to make major adjustments. And the oldest brother, instead of going to college, he was really good at football and people really liked him. Handsome man, played by Patrick Swayze. Okay, I'm past it. The talented Patrick Swayze. Anyway, so he's the oldest brother, and he took on the role of like father and mother because they lost both their parents in that car accident. And he's always really harping on Pony, but it's because it's kind of like tough love. Like, he really wants Pony to do good, and he wants to put him through college, and he doesn't want him to have to worry like he did, and he feel like he missed his chance, but he'll be damned like if his brothers have to miss out on things. But he doesn't really show that to Pony, like, I'm doing this because I care about you. So Pony just sees it as him nagging him and treating him differently than he treats Soda, who he usually treats as like his equal and isn't as hard on. But Pony even states that everyone likes Soda, everyone treats Soda great, and he's not bitter about it. He really looks up to Soda and is really close to Soda. I mean, they even share a bed, and a lot of that is probably because they can't afford several beds, but they don't seem to mind. They're really close. And Soda is like really sweet, really handsome. Everyone tends to like him. He keeps to himself. He's like the middle child peacemaker, and Pony's the youngest, and he doesn't really think things through, but he's also super young and super smart, and he's the narrator, and the main character. So yeah, so we have Ponyboy, who's 14, the youngest, who tells the story all the time. And then we have Soda, who's the middle brother, and then we have Derry, who's the oldest brother. I hope that makes sense. And their last name is Curtis. So there's that. And I think Soda dropped out, and he even says it's because I'm dumb, and he doesn't have any interest in school. He knows it's not going anywhere. And Pony is really sad about that. He feels like Soda's not dumb, you have to keep trying, you should go back, but Soda doesn't want to do that. But he also helps Derry with the bills, working at his job, and I think Derry works in like construction or something like that, or carpentry. And yeah, so Interesting. Okay. So Pony is leaving the movie theater, and they have this rivalry, sort of turf war going on. Like, the other side of the train tracks would be, what are they called? Greasers, whatever. They're labeled the Greasers. They have gelled back hair, they're rough, they don't have as much money, they're considered criminal, blah, 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 right? Literally. And then there's the Socs who live on the nicer side of the tracks, aka the rich kids, the Richies, who have the nice cars, the Mustangs. I mean, there's like Mustangs in the movie, and they talk about how it's super tough, it's kind of cool, they have cool cars, but shitty attitudes and personalities, and they treat the Greasers like shit, and the Greasers also treat them like shit. And I think that it makes a lot of sense. It happens all the time. They just have different names for it, I suppose. And I also think it's sad because literally the only difference is money. Literally the only difference is money and social class. And I think people sometimes, especially if you didn't grow up poor or like lower middle class, you really forget how different your life is when you don't have money and access. And I think it's easy to get caught up on the levels of that. It can vary very much, but I don't know. It's crazy, but it makes sense that there's like a whole thing. And the major difference is not that, that they don't get along. They don't get along because they feel like one is better than the other, and then the other one's trying to stand up for themselves. It's a whole thing. Anyway, they have this rivalry, Greasers and Socs. It's literally the plot of the movie. And the Curtises are considered greasers. They don't have a lot of money. They gel their hair back. They are rough and tough and blah, blah, blah. But they're actually decent people. They just are poor. That's literally why. I mean, that's what I think, at least. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I mean, that's the only defining thing, is that they're poor. So now they're greasers. Like, honestly, the Curtises probably wouldn't be a part of a gang if they didn't just get along with all the other greasers, who are 2-Bit, which is one of the close friends who's always joking, and Steve, who always seems to have an attitude with Pony, but he's like really close friends with Soda. And then there's Dallas, aka Dally, who's like the worst, but he really, really likes being a greaser, I think, like, because it feels like he has a family, because his old man, he says, doesn't like him or care about what he does, which is true, just a theme here. That seems like the parents that are there are neglecting their kids, and the ones that aren't there have made these kids orphans, in one way or another, whether intentional or not. Then there's Johnny Cade, who's like the very nervous, very kind and sweet one, who is actually older than Pony, but honestly sometimes I would think he was the youngest, and he's one of my favorite characters. And he has abusive parents, so there's that, who don't give a shit about him. And he's really close to Dallas. And who am I forgetting? I feel like I'm forgetting someone. I think that's like the main group, and then there might be like a few others that didn't really get main character status or names in the film. So there's that. And then, so Pony's walking home, and the Socs, two of the Socs, I don't really think it was the two that come into play later. Just a couple Socs in their car follow Pony home, and they keep harassing him, and eventually they I think they pull a blade on him or something and says he needs a haircut, calls him a greaser, like it's a slur, and I think they do cut him on the neck, and he's alone and he's scared, but he's trying to act tough, so maybe they'll leave. And the only reason why they end up leaving without doing more harm, even though they did cut him by the neck slightly, is because the greasers show up, like 2-Bit and Steve and Soda and all them, and they save Pony, woo. But later they get home, Pony's a little shaken up about it, and mad too. And Derry and Dally, it's like almost the exact same. But Derry's the older brother of Pony, and he is pissed because he's like, why were you walking by yourself? And blah, blah, blah. And he's like, you never think ugh, like, my kid brother never thinks. He says kid brother a lot. And when he's pissed off, he's like, really? I kind of just wanted to come home and relax after getting fucking jumped, but okay. And then, so that's a whole thing. There's a moment where all the guys are at the Curtis's, and they tend to go to the Curtis's house a lot. I think in the novel they state that they leave their door unlocked because sometimes the boys need a place to stay, and a lot of them have, like I said, they're orphans, or they have single parents, or they don't have parents, and they don't have a lot of money, and they just want to go away from home, so they go to the Curtis's home. It's like the house that all the kids go to when they want a popsicle, when they want to play. That's kind of like what their house is. And so Pony even says, like, sometimes he'll wake up in the morning and one of the boys will be there, and it's just a normal thing. So anyway, after all that happens, they're all at the Curtis's house, and Pony and them argued or whatever. Pony and Derry argued. And Johnny Cade's there. They see that Dally's out of prison, because he's always, well, not prison, maybe jail. He's always in jail. He's always doing something, fucking stealing, doing stupid shit. And he's out now, so whatever. And Pony and Johnny start talking. I don't know if this is the point where Francis Coppola does this shot, but he does this a few times in the movie, and I think this is one of the times where how do I explain this? And there's probably a word for it, but I can't remember what it's called. So Johnny is in the frame, and he takes up most of the frame. It would almost be considered a close-up, not an extreme close-up, but enough of a close-up that you get it, right? So you see his face, and let's say he's in the the close corner on the right. So his face takes up most of the frame. And usually when directors do this, their face will take most of the frame, and if they show anything on the side of that frame, it'll be out of focus. But it's not out of focus. You see Pony standing up. And so it's like a full body of Pony, but in clear view, and then a close-up of Johnny in clear view. And it's not distorted, and it's not wonky, and everyone's unfocused, but I just thought it was really interesting, and I wondered why he decided to do that with this scene. I think because Pony and Johnny start getting closer throughout the film, and because they build their friendship, and they're the youngest, maybe there's a reason why he decided to do it just specifically with them a lot of the time. And I think when he does this, it's usually just Johnny and Pony. But I just thought it was really cool because he didn't make anything out of focus. They were all in the frame, but Johnny takes up most of the frame, talking about his life and his parents, and then Pony, just got cut or whatever, and he's in the far corner. And again, I don't know if this is exactly when that happens after all that, but I'm just gonna stop there and talk about that because I remembered it. As we move on, we get an invitation from Mr. Dallas, aka Dally, and he's like, do you guys want to go see a movie? Pony and Johnny say yes. I think he went there to try to get a girl because his current girlfriend cheated on him when he was in jail, so he's over that or whatever. Anyway, Johnny and Pony want to actually see the movie, I believe. So they're like, sure, we'll go because we actually want to see the movie, and it's at a drive-in. And they end up going to the movies. There's a whole little sequence of them walking to the movies and it turning from day to night, and I think they go under the fence and don't pay an admission fee because they go under the fence and they're at the movie. And when they're there, this whole scene I think was really just a setup for connections and the motivator for the main plot or the main conflict in the story, I guess. So they go to the movies, and when I say they, this is Pony, Johnny, and Dally. They're all at the movies. It's a drive-in, not the movie theater. Movies have a huge part of this, by the way, which I really like. Anyway, so they're sitting there in these bleachers, and you can hear the movie. You see, it feels very much like they're at a drive-in, but they're outside of a car. They're sitting, and in front of them, so there's Johnny and Pony right now. I think Dally's on the far corner. In front of them is Cherry, who is a girl that goes to their school who's a soc, so she has money. and next to her Marcy, I think her name is Marcia or Marcy, and that's like another Soc, and she's a girl. And in the book it talks about how, not so much in the movie, but it talks about how, Pony says he thinks Soc girls are different. They have a different vibe about them. They act a certain way, whatever. They look expensive and they act that way. And Cherry's just, she's beautiful, and so is Marcia, but Cherry's like next level, and he's talking about her looks or whatever. And he's also comparing like greaser girls. So even though you never really see that dynamic there, the book talks about it a little bit. They don't actually bring any greaser girls into the picture, although they mention like their girlfriends, some of the other greaser guys. But yeah, so I don't know, I just feel like it was kind of weird, because it's like Pony says in the book how he would prefer pretty much to date like a Soc girl. They're cooler than the greaser girls, they're pretty or whatever, they act different. But I felt like that's kind of hypocritical, which is why I thought it was misogynist sometimes in the movie and in the book overall, because it's like, so it's okay for the guys to be rough and tough, but it's not okay for the girls to be tough when they've had the same experiences and been taught the same thing just because they have vaginas. Like, I thought that was stupid. And I think he's holding the Soc girls at a different standard. And like I said before, the only standard that's different is that they have money. So yes, of course they look pampered and they act bougie because they can afford to. So I thought that was super annoying in the book, and not so annoying in the movie, but just because they didn't really explain it past the fact that it's like surface level, like they're Socias and they're girls and they're there in front of them. Okay. And the another annoying thing is that Dally is pretty much harassing them the whole time. So, no, not pretty much, he definitely is. I would call it assault at this point. Like, dude, go the fuck away. And once he leaves, everything's fine because Johnny tells him to leave, and he listens to Johnny. He doesn't listen to anybody but Johnny. He sees Johnny as like his little brother, and he leaves. Cherry's really tough, really cool. Marcia is just calm and doing her thing. They have like this connection. They talk about sunsets. Does the sunset look the same on the other side? You know, obviously it does, but you know, it's like everything seems sweeter when you don't have to worry about money all the time. And they're sitting there and they're just talking, and Cherry is pretty much like, you guys are so cute and sweet, and you go to our school and blah blah blah, and she's like a cheerleader or whatever. So that's like a whole thing. I think they are even alone because their boyfriends, Bob and Randy, were drunk and they didn't want to be around them when they're drunk because they act crazy. And that's why they were there alone, which becomes an issue. We find out, so let's backtrack. Johnny, like a few weeks or so ago, was like jumped just like Pony was, but it was much worse. He was beaten real bad by several guys, and they were Socias and they were driving a Mustang or something like that. And one of the guys had rings, and it really fucked him up worse because the rings obviously hitting your face is worse than just a like nude naked fist with nothing on it. And so Johnny is having pretty much, I think it would be like PSD about it, and he's already a really nervous person, so it's just terrible. And the guys found him and he was crying, and Pony remembers it being so bad and they felt so terrible. And so it turns out later that those same guys are actually Cherry and Marcia, or whatever her name is, their boyfriends. So we find that out, and we find that out that day because, well, that night, because they're all walking home together. It's 2-Bit at this point has showed up, cracked jokes, and is walking with Ponyboy and Johnny home along with Cherry and Marcia, whatever. And they're walking and they hear Mustang, and at first they thought they avoided it and like they didn't see him, and they're like, oh great, because we don't want to deal with them. Like the girls were saying they don't want to deal with their boyfriends. But then they trail back and they get mad because they see their girlfriends are with 3 greasers. And that's when Johnny realizes that the guys that beat him up and jumped him so bad are their boyfriends, are Cherry and Marcia's boyfriends. And not only that, these guys already jumped him, and there's already like an issue there for Johnny. And Pony's realizing that these are the guys. He didn't know who the guys were at first. He just knew that Johnny got hurt by some socias. And these guys are now even more mad than they already would be because they're greasers. So now they're more mad because they're with their girlfriends or blah, 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 and they're drunk. So it's just terrible. And so they take the girls home because the girls are trying to avoid a fight. And 2-Bit leaves, and I think Johnny and Pony go to like a park together, and just like a neighborhood park, and they're chilling. It's really cold. They're talking, vibing, whatever. And then Pony goes home, and Derry, his brother's already really mad at him because he's like, where have you been? Do you know what time it is? And then Pony's like, oh, I fell asleep at the park. He's like, you don't use your head. What if something happened? You're going to go to a boys' home if they, you know, blah, blah, blah. That's like something that's always hanging over his head, that he could be sent to the boys' home if he messes up. Which is true, I guess, but it's a lot of pressure on a 14-year-old. And so I think Derek gets so mad that he slaps Pony, and Pony runs out pissed off and angry because this has kind of been boiling for a while and they're always fighting. I will note also that while I think the soundtrack of the movie is good, I do feel like they had some very dramatic moments, which this was made in the 80s, so I mean dramatic is typical, but some of the music choices made it feel even more dramatic. And although they go through some majorly serious issues, it still had a little bit of corny dramatic music that didn't help the scenes, even though I think that their intention was to heighten the scenes, and it didn't. So just gonna note that that's something I didn't like in some of the scenes. Anyway, Pony goes back to the park with Johnny, and he's like, I'm mad, I'm not going home. I mean, he already went home, but he's like, I'm not going back because Derry is terrible to me, blah, blah. And Johnny's like, Pony, calm down. Like, I think you're just misunderstanding. I thought you guys were super close. And Pony's like, well, we're not. And blah, 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 blah. So, whatever. He's being petty. And, I mean, he has the right to be upset about his brother hitting him. But I think that the other stuff is a bit dramatic, like I said. But, okay. And so they're back at the park. And who shows up at this point when they're trying to cool off? It's the Socs that they saw earlier that day, Bob and Randy. And of course they're even more drunk and they're still pissed off, and it becomes this whole fight. And again, they already had issues with Johnny in the past because they jumped Johnny, and so Johnny literally has to deal with that trauma. He was literally attacked, literally, and he at this point is like, I'm not gonna let that happen to me ever again. So it's fighting time. Like, they fought, and really it's not fair. I think there were several, like at least 5 of them against like 2, so that's already like unfair advantage. It's like super late at night. There's a fountain at the park or wherever they're at, and they start drowning Pony, and I think they're like hitting Johnny, and Johnny stabs Bob, and when Bob stops responding, all the Socs leave, and there's just the shot of like Pony and Johnny talking, saying like, I killed him, they were gonna kill you, Pony, I killed them, they were drowning you, you know. Clearly he's in shock, and he's like, what the fuck did I just do? But also he was like, self-defense, you know, like, I was just trying to help you, they were drowning him, and they were drowning Pony, so I guess, yeah, it's self-defense, but he still took a life, and Johnny did. And there's this really interesting scene of a dead body, and there's blood on like the pavement, and then that fountain that was like water before, clear water, is now like red because blood got in it. And it's eerie, and they're cold, and they're shivering, and they're young, and they're scared, and they run just like the Socs already did. They left their friend, by the way. Thought that was weird. Anyway, so Ponyboy and Johnny run to, who else? Who will they run to? They run to Dally, because Johnny is really close with Dally, Dahlia lives with this guy who owns this bar. I don't know. Anyway, they go there and they tell him what happened, and he's kind of shocked, I think, a little bit, because he doesn't expect them. But he literally says to Johnny, "Oh, good job." I'm like, dude, really? You're supposed to be, like, better. Come on, he looks up to you. Anyway, if that doesn't tell you what type of person Dahlia is, then I don't know what does. Anyway, he gets the money and a gun, and he tells them where they should go, and so they get on this train. It's a whole thing. Anyway, they get on this train, and then that train takes them to some middle of nowhere town in the country. At this point, I think they're in like a city within like Oklahoma or something like that, like a bigger city or whatever. And they're going to like the middle of nowhere in the country, like small population, shit like that. A few towns over or something like that. And they go there by getting on like a freight train and sneaking on there. And then they get to this town, and then they have to ask, like, where's J Mountain? Because that's where they were told to go by Dally. And it happens to be a really high up hill where there's an abandoned church that they start living out of. Johnny goes to like the convenience store. At this point, the news probably isn't in the papers, so they're not really worried about people recognizing them quite yet. And he gets like a week or so supply of like bologna. He gets a copy of Gone with the Wind and like a few other things to like bleach their hair and cut their hair so that they can change their appearance. This is the whole thing where Pony's hair gets cut, and he bleaches Pony's hair and he's a blondie, and then cuts up his own hair. Johnny gets his hair cut too by Pony, and they pass the time with being outside, reading Gone with the Wind, which I don't even know why that was the book that they grabbed onto, but it did. And Pony really likes to read, and Johnny likes to listen, so it's cute. And they're bonding, but things are really stressful, and they're getting tired of eating bologna, and they haven't heard anything, so, you know, they're scared. They're very young, like I said before. Pony is 14, Johnny can't be more than 16. They're babies. And while I understand there's a responsibility for Johnny having to own up to the fact that he took someone's life, I do believe it was self-defense, and this wasn't the first time that those men attacked him. It wasn't premeditated. They were drunk and they were looking for a problem, just like they were when they jumped Johnny. I think you have to take responsibility for your actions, but I think that to just call Johnny a murderer is also inaccurate. And again, they're all minors. I think the Socs were probably 17 or 18 because Cherry and Marcia were like probably juniors or seniors, so they're probably about the same age. But still, and Bob's the one who died. Randy ran off with the other guys. It's a mess, and it's unfortunate. I'm sure it's happened before and will happen again. And I think, again, that's why I call this book edgy and serious, without like one of the best versions of coming of age that gets real serious, because it talks about real issues that real people are facing that aren't always explored or shown in a way that I feel like these characters were allowed to be vulnerable and shown on screen. So there's that. And then what else? So they're at the church. At some point, you know, they have like these conversations, and it's not so much that they're arguing with each other, it's just like they're talking out loud and they're frustrated and they're scared, and time just passes, and I think it's been like a week, and Dally shows up and he tells them like what's going on. He tells Pony like, here's a letter from Soda, you know, I said I didn't know anything, but I guess he didn't believe me, here's a letter. And I think Soda's just like, are you okay? You know, Derry feels real bad about hitting you. We're scared. We just want you to be okay. And then Derry is really worried about Johnny and glad that he's okay, but worried about what's going to happen. And he's making fun of Pony's hair because it doesn't look great or whatever. I think it looks okay. I mean, they cut each other's hair with a knife. I mean, it's not like they had the best utensils, but that happens. And it's a whole thing, like everything is. It's always a whole thing, right? And he takes him to the nearest Dairy Queen or something like that. because they're hungry, and they get like barbecue sandwiches and fries and so on. And at that point, they're talking and talking, and Johnny just decides by the time they're done with their meal that he thinks that they should turn themselves in. He's hearing all this updated news, and he's like, it's probably easier, I won't get as much time, and Pony doesn't even have to be a part of it. He's a witness, and I think the defining reason why he was okay with that mostly is because Cherry has been stating that she knew that her boyfriend was up to no good. They went out that night drunk, and she knew that Pony and Johnny were good kids, and so if anything happened, it was definitely in self-defense. Like, that's a really good witness to have, and especially if it's the girlfriend of the person who was hurt. Like, I mean, she would know him probably pretty well, and so that's kind of something that sparks. And I think Derry even calls her like a spy, or whatever, because she's like actually talking to them in a formal way and meeting up about things. So that happens, and as they're deciding that they're probably definitely going to go back home, they drive back to Jay Mountain, and the church is on fire. I guess one of their cigarette butts didn't go all the way out. Something made it catch on fire, and they notice that there's like a group of kids and like a few adults, and it looks like they were having like a picnic or like a school picnic, and some of the kids went into the church, and then there was a fire. That's a lot going on. And Johnny and Pony end up like saving them. I think Pony runs in first, then Johnny, and then Dally runs in because he's worried about Johnny, and they do manage to save the kids, but not without getting hurt. Like, Pony gets hurt, but Johnny gets hurt real bad. I think when they get to the hospital later, they say that he's going to be paralyzed, probably from like the waist down. He's in a lot of pain, and I think Dally gets hurt pretty bad too because he had to be in the hospital for a few days. So obviously they're in the hospital. Pony has like a few scratches here and there, but it's not enough to have to be hospitalized. But he's very much underweight, stressed, overwhelmed, probably depressed, all these things. And at the hospital, there's this really, really cute scene of the brothers seeing Pony and hugging him and so happy to be there and see that he's okay. They're crying and hugging and apologizing, and Pony's accepting all of it, and he's just happy to see his brothers. He's also happy to know that at least, even though Johnny and, Dally are hurt, that at least they're like in hospital and they're getting treatment. And people are calling them heroes later because they saved those kids, and the witnesses there are really saying really good things about them, all that stuff. So it's helping their other case as well, that they're like helping people. So there's that. And so they go home, and that was such a really cute moment. It's actually one of my favorite moments. It's so cute and like sad at the same time, seeing the brothers hug each other and embrace each other. They go home, and Derry's really worried about Pony, as he should be. Pony looks like he's literally gonna crumble any minute, and who wouldn't? Soda's worried too. Derry's so worried that he's thinking about staying home from work to take care of his brother, which he doesn't do, like, ever. They need the money. And even Pony even says, like, you can't afford it, I'll be fine. And Two-Bit pretty much says, oh, I'll stay with him, because Two-Bit doesn't really have a job. He just is always there watching cartoons and eating chocolate cake, which is like a thing in their house. They always have chocolate cake at all hours of the day, and they always have it ready. I don't know why, it's just their thing. And so this is like the following day, like Pony is greeted by Steve, and everyone's happy that he's back, but worried about him and worried about Johnny and all that stuff, because Johnny's in really bad condition. At least with Dally, he's like still being an asshole, so they know that he's fine, he's being his normal self, but he's worried about Johnny, and he just has to stay in the hospital for like a few days, whereas Johnny's paralyzed, and literally he can't even lay on his back in the hospital bed. That's how fucked up his back is. He's like on his belly, and he's on like some breathing machine, and he can barely say anything. Like, it's so sad to see. And so we have that going on. I think Two-Bit and Pony kind of take a walk, and Pony gets really, really like dizzy or something. He's sitting down, and Two-Bit's like, are you okay? If something happens to you, your brother's gonna kill me, because he's like babysitting him practically. And I think at this point they're gonna have like this big rumble because of everything they did to Johnny and like everything that's been going on. It's just the tension is just boiling over. It's always been there. They've always hated each other. The Greasers and the Socs is who I'm talking about. They're gangs, they're rival gangs. And so they're just like, we're gonna set a time and a place, no weapons, just fist, bodies, and we're meeting here and we're fighting it out at this time, and everyone agrees. Everyone agrees to it. And so Pony wants to be a part of it, and everyone's like, dude, you're not looking too good. And Two-Bit even says that, like, meh. And Pony's like, well, if you shut your trap, no one will know. He just wants to fight, even though he shouldn't. And that all happens. So fast forward to, I'm just going to fast forward to the Rumble. Actually, no, because before the Rumble, Pony and Two-Bit go to the hospital and they talk to Johnny, and I think they talk about Gone with the Wind again, and he, like, whatever. And Dally talks about how he's mad at the Socs, and this whole dramatic scene where he, like, stabs his pillow or something. He's like, let's do it for Johnny. This whole, like, scene. I don't know. I thought it was over dramatic, but I understood where he was coming from. And, okay, now we can fast forward to the Rumble. So they have this all-out battle, skin to skin, which just means, like, no weapons. And they're super excited about it on the way. They're, like, doing flips and shit. And then they have the full-on battle, and ultimately the Greasers end up winning. And even though it's not going to change anything really, I mean, nothing really changed from it. They just got their energy out, I suppose. So I guess that's one win, and I can say that they beat them and won, right? The Socs run off and they lose, but everyone's all cut up and beat up, and I'm sure the Socs were cut up and beat up as well, obviously, because they were fighting. And Pony's real fucked up. Like, he already was sick going there, but now he's even more weak, even more cut up. Literally looks like he's gonna pass out any second. I think he gets hit in the head at some point, and Soda got mad about that, and, like, because one of the Socs hit something, like, beat that guy up, and they even talk about it, like, Soda was pissed, someone hit his baby brother. And Derry was hanging around watching out for Pony the whole time because he really didn't think he should have been there, but he was trying to, like, he just got back home, so, trying not to have any tension. And they win, but the first thing that Dally and Pony do is they leave that little Rumble after it's done, and they go to the hospital to kind of tell Johnny about the good news. But Johnny is not doing good. Like, he's gotten worse and worse, and he says that that's not going to fix anything, when they tell him that they won the Rumble. And he, at some point, like, his mom showed up to the hospital, he didn't want to see her, and who would want to see their parent who literally doesn't give a damn about them and shows up randomly? And at some point he, like, takes his last breath, and before he falls into, like, his bed and closes his eyes, he dies. By the way, he dies. Spoiler, he dies. And before all that, he says, "Stay gold, Ponyboy," which to them was like, it's from when they were reading Gone with the Wind, and, like, they were talking about other, like, poetry and writers, and stay gold to Johnny just means stay young, And I remember Johnny saying that there was so much that he wanted to see, and he had joked before about wanting to kill himself. But now that he didn't have the choice and he was in so much pain, he was like, 16 years isn't long enough. It's just not long enough. I don't want to die. But he does die. And it's always sad when a character dies. Especially Johnny, because he's, like, one of those that had so much potential and got all the bad cards. So he dies. And Pony is really sad and just out of it. You can tell that he doesn't even know how to process it. It's like he is in denial. He doesn't even want to believe it. And then, of course, Dally's pissed because he's like, he can't die. He's like a brother to me. he's like the only close family I have besides the other Greasers, but they are just really close, and he feels like it's his fault, but he's also mad. He just doesn't even know how to deal with his emotions, which is very clear. And he runs off, and Pony goes home, and Pony walks in, and they were like, "Oh, Ponyboy, there you are," you know, and they're like, "Pony, what's wrong?" And when I say he's back at his home, and it's like Soda, Steve, Two-Bit, and Derry. I'm sorry if I mix up Derry and Dally sometimes, it's just so similar. But Derry, his oldest brother. And he tells him that Johnny's dead. And that they should probably find out where Dally is, because he is just not okay. And everyone's sad, and then I think there's a call from Dally saying, "Hey, I need you to come pick me up. The cops are following me." He goes to some store and like makes an issue with one of the store owners or clerks. I don't know what that was about. It kind of happens really quickly, and I don't even remember what happens in the book in terms of that. I don't know if it was added, but anyway, he gets shot down by the cops. I mean, he pulls out a gun, but it's not loaded, and their first thing is to just kill him on sight, and they do. So not only does Johnny die with potential, but Dally dies. Someone who systemically never had a chance, who I wouldn't say had potential later, but I mean, he was never given a chance to have potential. He is like a huge victim of society, and then going in and out of jail as a kid, and no one really cared about him. And I'm not going to okay all the shitty stuff that he's done, because it doesn't take away that, especially as he got older. But I do think there's something to say for kids who are never given a chance, and so they just cling on to the only thing they know, which is stealing, making a mess, and being in and out of jail, because that's all they know, right? And yes, there is something to say about kids who fall into the system and get treated like shit, and so they treat others like shit, right? And like I said, when you get to a point and you're old enough, you really need to make those smarter decisions and decide if you really want to be better for yourself. And I think a lot of people regret it later when they're older. But yeah, he was shot down and killed because he had a gun that wasn't loaded, and I think his friends, they found him and they saw all of it go down, and they're screaming, "It's not loaded, it's not loaded." And I think a piece of him knew that he was gonna get killed, because why else would he pull out the gun? He had the gun in the past just to scare people off. But I kind of feel like he would have shot, like, if he was the type who would have had a loaded gun, but he didn't, and he just sort of did it for show, to scare people, scare tactics. But I think he knew that they were going to shoot him. I don't want to say it was a suicide attempt, but I think his mind was really scattered at that point. But yeah, it's pretty fucked up that they just shot him and killed him. Like, they definitely could have wounded him. I just don't feel like they had to shoot him down. I have a whole thing about that, but I'm not going to get into details. I just, at the end of the day, just know that I feel like Dally is a victim of society, and that's that, right? So they lose two friends in one night. After they see the shooting, Pony pretty much just passes the fuck out. He's just done. Like, he just passes out. And we wake up to like this delirious Pony remembering parts of days and asking for soda or something like that. Not for a soda, but for his brother's soda. And yeah, eventually they tell him like he's been out of it for days on days on days. He has a concussion, like, yeah, he's like has to stay in bed, he's bedridden at some point. It doesn't show this in the movie, but one of the socials comes over and talks to him because they have a trial that they have to go to about the Bob dying. I think Randy's the one who comes over, so he was a friend of Bob, and he came over, and that didn't really end well. Pony is a little bit in denial about the fact that Johnny's dead, and he is having a hard time at school. He used to get like A's and B's, and now he's getting like not barely passing. So it's showing, and his brother Derry is getting mad at him again, and they sort of they argue again and make up again, because they kind of sort of has a moment where he's like, you guys always pull me into this, and like, stop, like, I don't want to be your middleman anymore. And that happens. He speaks to Cherry again, kind of getting mad at her, but then they make up and talk about sunsets like they always do. And at this point, Pony's slowly but surely getting better after getting worse at this point. And one of his teachers pretty much tells him, like, I'll give you like a passing C if you can write me this paper. And he ends up writing a paper about his life and what he's been going through since he stepped out of that movie theater after thinking about Paul Newman and a ride home. And like I said in the beginning, that's how it starts and how it ends, except instead of the voiceover and watching him leave the theater, it's him at his desk writing about that and saying that on paper. And they win their court trial, so Pony doesn't have any charges. They know that he's not the one who killed anyone, and it was in self-defense. Johnny died. Bob was killed, but Bob also assaulted Johnny before and was drowning Pony. It's so much, man. Just talking about it now, it's just so crazy. And anyway, they win their case. Cherry was a witness, and she kind of helps them out as well. And Pony gets to stay with his brothers. He doesn't have to go to a boys' home. They also take into account that he saved all those kids in that church that was burning up. So there's all that. And so he sort of gets somewhat of a clean slate. He's more appreciative of what he has, even though he knows that they don't have much. I think in the book he talks about how, you know, we want more for ourselves. I think that we'll be able to do it at some point, but right now we're not doing that. But I'll still always consider, you know, the Greasers family, you know. And it's the happiest of endings that he could have gotten, I assume, you know. It's a great story, a great film. I think everyone should watch it and read it at least once. And I think The Outsiders is one of the best coming-of-age stories written. One of them. Even with some of its outdated concepts, even with the misogyny. Of course, I can only give you constructive criticism. Ultimately, you should definitely watch The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton, novelist who wrote the story, but directed by Francis Coppola. Thank you for listening, and have a good rest of your day.
I'm sorry. I thought we lost you like we did Mom and Dad.